Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Matthew Morgan. I'm the Principal Superintendent at Harmony Union School District. And it's great to see you all. Before we begin, if I could just get a general sense of where folks are coming from. I see names, but just let me know what schools or districts you're from. People are using the chat. Welcome from Petaluma Junior High. Nice to see you, Tara. Veronica from Santa Rosa, welcome. Spousal Union, we're all over the place. West, Santa Rosa.
Fade this next session.
Bristol and Twin Hills, it's lovely to see you all here. So thank you for joining us today. What the topic we're dealing with here in this session is about an initiative we're putting together for this fall and in the spring as well. And really we're trying to capitalize on this moment and try to establish a process for us in the county to share conversations across districts and schools and in our community over the years. So though we're in a moment that really is kind of galvanizing our attention to the issues of equity and diversity and inclusion, we wanted to establish an initiative that we could get going this year and continue into perpetuity, hopefully. And the model is basically a shared reading initiative that every school that wants to participate would do at the same time. So a synchronous reading activity where we'd have select texts that we'd use in certain grade ranges, and every participating school would use that same text during that same time period to engage their classes in conversation on a theme. And certainly the theme that we're focusing on is this issue of diversity and inclusion and equity in this fall session. And so we've already reached out to many districts across the county, and we have librarians from the Sonoma County Public Library, as well as folks at different schools and in SCO that are helping us go through a process of selecting some texts. And what our invitation is to our community, to all of our teachers and admin, is to join us, participate in this activity to get this conversation going in our classrooms. And then to support that process, we're going to be doing outreach in our community to have supplementary media occurring at the same time. So panel conversations, including local leaders, some discussions with people who are experts in having these conversations with children. How do you talk about issues of discrimination with children? How do you talk about race? How do you talk about racism with children? And so what we do is we'd be providing these services to the general Sonoma County community through Zoom sessions and other YouTube broadcasts in anticipation of the activities happening in the classroom. So, and then when you get to the class itself, you'd have a text to work with. There would be lessons provided based upon some of the work out of the teaching tolerance guidelines, and also on the 4 agreements work from the Courageous Conversations. So if you're familiar with the Courageous Conversations work by Singleton, that'll be sort of the backbone. So I'm going to share just briefly our agenda today, just talk a little bit about those 4 agreements, and we can talk about what that might look like. So here's the agenda. There we go. So a question I have for all of us here, how many of you have had experiences really attempting to engage students on issues like this, on issues of racism, discrimination, equity? What have been your experiences? What have you encountered in having those conversations?
I've only used the Courageous Conversation model with other staff members, not with students.
Yeah.
I found it challenging in speaking with high school students sometimes, and predominantly white high schools.
Yeah.
To bring up race and issues like that without there being a sense of feeling challenged or feeling that there's an element of irrelevance. And that was before this COVID hit. And so we are at a new level, and the opportunity is good to really see why it's relevant.
Yeah, it is quite a challenge. Do folks have experiences in your classrooms again, like when you encounter topics like this, sometimes you get, particularly in younger grades, the kids will say the darndest things and there's not a whole lot of filtering there. Some cases that's really powerful to be able to have kids just be able to say what they need to say. But as they get older, there's often a lot of filtering that they do, sometimes making real conversations impossible to have. So this is we're anticipating that for some folks, some teachers and admin, this will be quite a challenge to try to implement, because there's a lot of fear that arises for us as folks that are the leaders in the classroom. How do we engage our children in these conversations without things going off the rails? And I think there's a fear around that, how that could happen, middle school and high school, but even in younger grades. Do folks have much experience with restorative resources or restorative practices? No, not much. So in both restorative practices and in the work around courageous conversations, there are several sort of fundamental guidelines that are essential. And the first one is engagement and active listening. So people, when they're sitting in that circle, or if we're here in a Zoom session, which is a bit difficult, you really have to engage your children in having that conversation and listening to each other, deep listening, to hear their experiences. And while they're doing that, hold that feeling of discomfort. So experiencing discomfort was one of the second agreements. And it's like, how do we have that ability to hold things that may feel attacking to us or cause us to feel defensive? This is something that even as faculty and admin, we have that experience. So how do we engage and listen actively while feeling discomfort from some of the statements that people may be making? And then when it's our turn to share, to speak our truth without, with politeness, but without filtering some of the core issues for us. So it requires some courage there. And that last one is accepting sort of non-closure, that there may not be an answer at the end of the conversation, that we may end the conversation, and that conversation's ending will leave more questions perhaps even than answers. So there's a lot in the 4 agreements process that requires a great deal of courage. And I think that for us in our society at this time, it's really essential for us to have that courage to engage in these conversations. There's the fracturing that we experience in our society, at least for those of us who are involved in this project, we feel is really rooted in that inability for us to have conversations on really important issues. So what role do we have as educators to help this next generation of American citizens engage in these conversations, which are going to be essential to us to maintain our society and our communities? So that's really what this initiative is calling us forward to look at, is how do we as educators work together across our districts to engage children in difficult conversations and develop a skill set, a capacity, and not only within our children, but also within our school sites, amongst teachers and admin, amongst our community with our parents, because that can be it can be scary and challenging. I know that for us, even at Harmony, when we've had conversations come up around Black Lives Matter movement, there's also folks in our community that they have family members or husbands or wives that are police officers, and so there's a lot of tension that comes up when that conversation comes forward. But it's absolutely essential for us to be able to have these conversations. Our children and our communities need these conversations to be able to knit ourselves together, even in the midst of coming to understanding about how do we stop racism, how do we help our children deprogram our society around them. So my question for you, if you can think of towards this, and I'm going to ask for you to share, is in those 4 agreements that we'd be asking folks to engage in, staying engaged, experiencing discomfort, speaking your truth, or expecting and accepting non-closure, which for you personally, if you're in those sessions, if you've had these conversations, which for you feels the most challenging and why?
Oh, phew. Okay.
You're welcome to just popcorn it out there. If you want to click off mute and let me know what your thoughts are on that. And if your video's not up, you just want to let us know where you're from.
I think for me, the hardest is accepting the non-closure. I want things to feel resolved, or that we have some agreements, or that we're going to move forward in some way together, and you can't always bring about that kind of neatness to the conversation.
My challenge as a first grade teacher is that students get really heated up about this topic, which is great. I do always worry that their parents are going to misinterpret what I'm doing. So far, I haven't gotten any blowback, but it is something that's always a little worry in the back of my mind. Like, why are you focusing on race?
Yeah. Does that resonate with other folks in the session? That concern about how what we do in the classroom is being interpreted by our parents or our community at large? Yeah, and I know that that's probably one of the biggest challenges I think for us in this process is how do we establish a norm in our community that this is the practice that we have, that this is part of what education process is not to avoid the difficult issues, but to confront them and to have these conversations and again, learn how to have them. So this project, though, the initiative from maybe a teacher perspective is what's happening, like how do I even deal with this in the classroom? I think it's really important for our administration and for our districts to wrap their heads around how do we engage our communities about the importance of these conversations and that we need to demonstrate that leadership in our communities, that this is important and essential for us. So in the run up to this project, we will be providing training for admin and faculty to be able to have these conversations even in your own schools, because even that part alone might be a difficult part. How do you even have this conversation as a staff? It's not to make assumptions that everyone is on the same page around Black Lives Matter or around anti-racist work or equity and diversity. We can't have that assumption. And yet, we know that as educators, it's really important for us, again, for the future of our society, that we need our children to be able to work with each other in a pluralist democracy. It's not going to work otherwise. So, so for you and your school sites, what would you see as obstacles, perhaps, for implementing something like this? Where would you see a stopping point for your district to implement or for your classrooms?
I've had teachers tell me previously that, race is not their topic to discuss. That's a home conversation that they're not at all comfortable broaching and fundamentally don't feel is appropriate for schools or education to address. So that's definitely a barrier, is just people's fundamental beliefs about who should be having these conversations and is it important for schools to be involved in this initiative.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah.
I also, my name's Andreka, and I work at Orchard View School, but I also think for me, there's this level of discomfort in terms of my expertise to be presenting information.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm totally with you on that. I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in. I'm
Go for
totally
it.
with you on that. And when I started to teach about skin color and racial differences and cultural inclusivity, I thought, who am I? I'm a white woman. Like, what if I make a mistake? And I'm like, well, I'm the only teacher in my classroom, so if I don't do it, there's no other teacher here to do this. And this is the time. I can't have students walk away without really starting to understand and understand their role in making the world more fair. And it's not fair that white students don't have to have the conversation and kids of color do.
Yeah. Thank you for the courage in that. But yeah, I really think that feeling of that we don't have the skill set yet as teachers to engage in these conversations, I think is really a hindrance for us. And I think that's the goal of this project, is to build that capacity for us as teachers, the confidence that it's okay to have these conversations, that it's important for us to have these conversations. Andrea, you work at, is it Orchard View? Is that right? Or yeah, what grade levels do you work with?
Sorry, we have a really different program. It's an independent study blend where they're offered classes several days a week. So my caseload is working with kids between 8th and 12th grade this year.
Okay. So a secondary environment. When folks think about trying to establish something like this in their school, one of the first things we look for is finding other people that are at the school site or outside of our school to help sort of lash ourselves together on a raft, if you will, on an ocean that feels a bit tumultuous. And I think what we're attempting with this initiative to do is to lash a very large raft, a very big boat that multiple districts, multiple schools, a lot of leadership countywide engaging in this process, I think can provide that sense of stability and collaboration that would help people not feel so alone. I think sometimes embarking in these conversations as an individual can feel dangerous or perhaps inviting scrutiny that one may feel alone in that. To Sarah's comment earlier that these conversations are not ones that should happen in a school site. I think the importance for us as a county, if we look going to go forward and working on diversity issues, is that we have to see this as something that is it's a foundational piece that all schools and districts are going to participate in. And in that way, no one has to stand alone in that. And so building capacity for teachers in the classroom to have these conversations, building capacity for the administration to engage the broader community in these conversations about what these discussions are like in the school, and engaging the community in those conversations themselves. So the initiative will be selecting texts that'll be distributed to schools to use in classes. And by text, referring to children's books. I don't know if anyone's seen the children's book, is it Red? The little book about a crayon that is labeled a blue crayon, but it's labeled a red crayon, but it's blue wax. And trying to come to grips with what that identity piece is like. That's one example of a text. So as we use these texts and engage students in those conversations, it's going to be essential for us to have these conversations with parents as well. So the admin and for us putting forums out there to engage parents on what the content of the book is. What are the themes that we're going to be addressing? How are we addressing that theme in the conversation, and allow the children to in many ways lead the conversation. But we need to do the same thing with parents. And so when we do this project, there will be forums that will be happening at district level or school level to support parents and engaging in the material and the curriculum as well. The goal for us, again, is to build capacity. And so this first time around, we're going to be working with books that help people get in at the first step on the staircase, so that it maybe not be as inflammatory that first round, but books that definitely challenge us to take a look at some of these issues. What would help you if you were to look at doing something like this in your class? What do you need in order to go forward with trying to engage students in conversations around difficult topics? How do you have a courageous conversation? What do you need as a teacher? I'm seeing some notes in the chat, so if folks are taking a look at the chat, there's some good comments over there. Yeah, I see the note about the inclusion meeting students with disabilities. And I think that's important for us to see this through a very broad lens. When you're engaging students, I think that covers the comment earlier about working with kids, like where are you going to have this conversation? Or as a white teacher, and I'm sitting here as a cisgender white male, like, what right do I have to speak to it? And I think everyone has a right to speak to their experience and their truth. And it's also important for us to take on the responsibility of taking care of our neighbors, our brothers and sisters in this community. And so even if we don't know exactly how to do it, even if we don't have confidence in ourselves not to make a mistake, having the courage to go ahead and be willing to make a mistake, knowing that our intent is really to work towards that betterment of our community, that's the important baseline. And I think it's important for us to have all those voices in there. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion and equity, certainly that deals with issues like Black Lives Matter, but it also is a broad picture, disability diversity, the issues around gender diversity and gender spectrum. These are all important pieces to bring into the conversation. And the more lenses through which people can look at an issue, the greater chance we have of having engagement by that population. Everyone knows somebody, or they've had the experience themselves around this issue of discrimination or exclusion. And for younger children, just the issue of exclusion alone might be a conversation to engage with. What does it feel like to not be understood for who you are? That text read, I really recommend it for folks. It's a great book, and boy, does it span some age range, though it's written for probably a 5 or 6 year old audience. Just the notion of coming to grips with your identity being different than how people label you is an interesting conversation. So having good text is helpful. And so what we have is the benefit of these librarians are going to be selecting these texts for us, which is great. So other pieces here in the chat. Parents who trust me, how to build that trust during distance learning. That's a good question. I wonder if, is it Christy? Would you mind maybe speaking a little bit about that? You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. So usually when I'm teaching about topics that might be a little uncomfortable, I already know the parents. They've already met me several times. They know I'm not just this crazy person out there, and that I'm really interested in fairness. I'm really interested in kids getting a fair shake. And I think that is harder when they're not seeing me every day, and when they are trying to they're trying to do distance learning at home. I think the whole building relationships is definitely going to be more challenging this year. And when I have difficult conversations with students, I'm on a foundation of those relationships. So how do I build that when I don't see them face to face?
Yes. Yeah, I think that we have a double challenge this year with the distance learning piece. Trust really is a big part of it. And I think to that conversation again earlier about how do we deal with the trust of our community and us as schools to have these conversations. I mean, there's that constant worry. I mean, I was a history teacher, so history teachers in particular are often leveled accusations around our political motives or agenda that we have as a history teacher. And so there is that need for us to cleave a path of historical neutrality, but really is neutrality ultimately possible? What does neutrality really mean as a history teacher or as an educational institution? I would argue that it may not be possible, that everything has some political meaning to it. The question is, how do we as teachers and as leaders in education respect the need for diversity of thought and freedom of thought in our democratic society, while also being willing to help our communities confront truth or confront the experiences of our ancestors and our neighbors? How do we do that? And I would say that we by our fear of engaging in that, we somehow perpetuate to some extent some of those mistakes that our ancestors have made in this movement forward. So the bottom line is courage. And then there has to be a great deal of empathy on our parts to as we guide ourselves through this process of opening up these conversations, be willing to hear the concerns and fears people have around it, but not have that sway us away from being willing to do it, because it's essential. And for our kids, just from a baseline of sort of legal prerogative from the state of California, anti-bullying legislation that has been passed over the last several years, it really drives us as administration and teachers. We have to build a safe environment for our kids at school. And if we don't do this work, our environment for kids at school is not going to be safe. So that bullying perpetuates itself by us being afraid to have this conversation. And so it's scary. It is. I say this as an administrator, and my experience this year was interesting. Beginning of the year, I carried the rainbow flag, and that was met with a lot of controversy at my school site. And that experience of doing that alone is one of the reasons why I really want to move forward with a project like this, because it shouldn't be something where we have to carry that flag by ourselves. It's something that all of us should be able to hold together moving forward. But it requires a lot of courage and it requires listening. I'm not interested in trying to engage in controversy. What I'm interested in engaging with is real dialogue that'll help us build a capacity as neighbors to be able to live together and for our children to have a safe place to grow up. So that's a challenge. I'm seeing some posts here about the flag. That was interesting. Graphic novels, texts. If folks are interested in participating in planning this project, there's a meeting every Friday at 9 a.m. There's a link in, do you folks have access to the Google shared folder? Is that something that people see? I can try to link to them as well.
We will have access to that by the close of the conference, but we may not yet.
Okay.
I put a link in to the chat box because someone in the last session shared the link to all the resources. So
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your help.
Yeah, you do have access to those folders, so people, you can add things to that.
Perfect. Thank you again, Sarah, and thank you, Dan.
Matthew, may I ask one thing? I don't know if this is a good time.
Yeah, great.
I see in your plan that kind of the hope is to launch the actual reading of the materials in October, as you say up at the top.
Yeah.
Can you say more about how you selected that time period, given kind of what we're hearing about the need to first probably work with our own staff and possibly with parents before, you know, either I was imagining beforehand, but at least alongside, and so how that date was selected or what you're imagining is like the build up to the read?
Yeah, so we have over the next couple of weeks, we have the Disrupt kind of getting some of the word out in this forum. There's already been work for the last month from folks that are organizing ourselves for training and planning in the future. Our hope is that SCO would help facilitate those trainings sometime in late August or September for admin and staff to engage in these conversations. We've also made some relationships with other sort of difficult conversation facilitation groups. So there's a program out of Petaluma City Schools that they've already partnered with one group, and Harmony also has partnered with a group that does work on restorative resource and difficult conversations. So we're going to be engaging these folks to assist us in trainings being offered, hopefully through SCO, or if not through SCO, at least independently, so that other folks can log in and go through those trainings at a faculty and admin site level. And I would suggest, why I want to get this information out now at the end of July, is that for administrators or for teachers who are interested in approaching administrators about this, that we need to find a way to get on our calendar sometime in September, the opportunity for us to engage in these conversations as a staff. It's going to be important for us to do that first, because we need to know as a staff, one, what that experience is like, and two, develop a sense of trust amongst each other about our, you know, how we're going to do this. We're going to pull it together and engage in that trust. And then admin also need to be on board with the larger community piece about how to support these conversations in the community. So September would be a month where we'd expect to have several trainings, probably weekly, dealing with several different issues here. Curriculum in the classroom, how to handle that piece, as well as how do we deal with the back end of admin and teacher, you know, sort of campus level conversations, and then how do those conversations out in the community. So September, we would have released a schedule of those meetings to invite folks in. There are probably a multiple to keep the group small. And then while that's happening simultaneously, we're going to be developing media content to have available for distribution in the community. So collaboration with like newspapers and local public access channel, a couple of these sort of panel conversations. Maybe we could get a member of the county supervisors to join us. Maybe a couple of community leaders to discuss these issues. That may be one topic. In other words, the importance of having these conversations. What does it look like to engage in democratic conversation around this stuff in a safe way? And then what does that look like for us in our home environment? So a panel of psychologists or therapists about how to engage conversations with children about these issues. That would also be a resource that would be available either through pre-recorded or live broadcast. Those will be getting produced over that September and October month in preparation for a rollout in early October to engage folks in the community so they can see transparently what's happening. I think that one of the things that we have as a risk is trying to hide these conversations. People have a natural desire to have a conversation in the class, and they're worried about what people are going to think about it. And so we either do it really discreet or really quiet. But really what is the far better way to go about developing trust in the community is to be transparent about it. That these are conversations that we have to have. They're important for our kids' safety in the school, which I'm going to come back to that piece again. If people are looking for where the mandate comes from, our responsibility as educators is safety for our kids. And that safety has to be safety around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so that's where the imperative is. So if we keep coming back to that, it's about safety. It's about the thriving of each of our children at school. That's where we're coming from. And that in having these conversations, we can begin to work through some of these issues. So, does that help there, Sarah?
Yeah, may I throw out a consideration that
Sure.
we're definitely committed to this work and had already planned on kind of introducing the Courageous Conversations model this year. I wonder if there might be other schools like Pathways that may not be able to get to that in the September timeframe, and if we could consider, I mean, again, this is your work, I'm throwing out the idea
we're open to it.
of little mini PLCs within this group that might be a cohort that would implement it in the same time frame. So maybe we're ready in November with 3 other schools, or in some way that there could be capacity outside of this time frame that could evolve. So
Well, I think to take your question a little bit further, like if it's the case that the timeline's not realistic for most participants, I think that the power of this initiative is that we all do it together. And I think that's going to help schools that may feel a little timid about moving forward with something like this to have the confidence to do so. So while I appreciate the idea of maybe being flexible and moving small groups to at different times, I would say it'd be more important for us to kind of listen to your question about timing. If it really is presenting an obstacle for folks, maybe it's pushed back. Maybe we do it in November.
I would find it challenging to launch school in the format we have to and respond to all the other kind of crises things. And for us, it would definitely be more doable after October. Like if we were working with staff in October, November, and launching with students December, January. But I'm one person.
Well, no,
So
point taken. So I can bring that back to the planning group. And Sarah, I'd invite you to come join us too. I know your planning prowess is well known. So anyway, welcome, invite you to that. I see Dan clicking on his video there as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to share because it's related. Jamie Hansen here at SCO is in the process of organizing a series of 4 student forums that will be broadcast as sort of a town hall. The first will feature Black student voices, the second Latinx, the third Indigenous students, and then the fourth Asian students, really sharing their experiences and giving them a chance to be heard. So I think it ties in really well with this. I don't think she has exact dates set for that yet, but she's hurriedly working to pull all of that together. So
Dan, do you have a sense of timeline though? If not dates, was she looking at doing that over the course of the first semester? Or?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, trying to get the first one scheduled here as soon as possible, and then calendaring out the other ones, but definitely during this first semester. So more to come on that, but it's titled as sort of a student forums on racism, equity, and social justice. So I think it ties in very well with what you're planning here. And the key thing is that we didn't want them to just be a single forum and then we go, good, we check that off the list. But what are the actions that we can do beyond that? And this is a perfect example. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's right up this alley. And I think the idea of trying to integrate those as, every initiative that we're doing here countywide, binding them together in this larger piece so that people can see the connections between them would be helpful. I'm looking through the chat. I noticed that the person was talking about the idea of bringing up, they brought a panel in of religious leaders. And I'm wondering if Tara might have made the post. Do you want to just speak a little bit about what that experience was like and maybe what helps you in pulling it off well?
Sure. So I do a series, I'm the librarian at Petaluma Junior High. I do a series of speaker panels throughout the year. They're at lunch and optional, which is how we get around like parents being upset about things. But I've done a women's careers speaker panel, and then a world religions speaker panel, as well as authors and other things like that throughout the year. Our 7th graders have a world religions unit where they cover the major world religions. Petaluma actually has an interfaith group group. It's a collaboration between, I'm going to mispronounce it, but our Jewish community, our Presbyterian, and our Catholic community, they actually run a food bank together.
Wow.
So I reached out to them and asked if they would be willing to come do a panel. The students pre-brainstormed questions in class, and that was kind of also a hook to get them to come to the lunchtime meeting. And so we set it up so students can eat lunch, and the panel members answer the questions that were brainstormed in advance. And then there's also a little bit of time for questions at the end. And then we also had Holocaust survivors come through the Sonoma State program. And the feedback I've got from students is that it's really powerful to hear from people with those lived experiences and to be able to ask questions kind of anonymously, honestly, but also with the open questions at the end. But I found it to be really powerful, and it linked into curriculum. So and we never had parents complain about it or say anything. I know people were speaking to the anxiety that they had over doing some of these kind of things. Any other questions about it, or did I kind of?
Yeah, I think that's incredible. I mean, I'm wondering if other folks that are here have questions for you. That's a powerful opportunity. Did you, at the front end, when you were organizing it, how did you go about getting the information out to the student body? And was it something that, did admin assist in that, or was it something you had to kind of roll on your own?
So Renee Semick was my principal at the time when I first started instituting it. So I definitely had principal support, and I continue to have principal support with Kelly Chris, who's our principal right now. So no, I didn't have any, it was like, yeah, go for it. So I didn't have any of that. I basically, I wanted to provide, as a new librarian, I wanted to provide links to the curriculum and then people as a living resource. So we talk about information being books, but especially as we go into, it's becoming less and less so that way. It's databases online and people talking to people. And so I wanted to bring that component of information, people as information into the library space. And so I don't know if you've heard, there's a library that actually checks out people for conversations.
No, I love that.
Yeah, so they have a library of people who are willing to meet with people, and you can literally check out a person with a Muslim background to have a conversation with, or somebody who has the lived experience of being LGBTQ or someone that you're like, I want to know more about this and I want to talk to somebody. And so that was kind of my first foray into that kind of thing. As far as how I got the word out to students, because I linked it with curriculum. So the women's speaker panel was linked to an 8th grade unit. And then the world religions one, like I said, was linked to a 7th grade unit. Teachers actually offered a little bit of extra credit if students would come. And so they advertised it in their classrooms. I also put it out in the parent newsletter, on our Facebook page, on the library page. And then I had posters that my TAs hung up around campus. And then I help with the morning announcements. So I'm sure the kids were sick of it by the end, but the 2 weeks leading up to it, I'm like, don't forget, come meet these people. They're here for you. I do have limited capacity in my library, which is kind of frustrating. So I'm limited to 70 kids, and that also creates this urgency. So there's a Google a Google form that the kids fill out to sign up. And I would be able to say in the morning, we only have 10 more spaces left, sign up. And so that kind of sense of oh my gosh, it's exclusive. I think got people to sign up early. And then I, because it's a Google form and it had collected their email addresses, I just pushed out a reminder to all the students that it was, don't forget to come at lunch. In that Google form where they signed up, it also had a list of agreements that they needed to agree to in regards to respect, just reminders of common courtesy, and that these people are coming and talking about their experiences, and that you need to be mindful of that and respectful in your interactions with our guest speakers and represent the school well. If people are interested in that, I can share the form that I sent out. Basically, I use the same one and just change who the guest speaker is and the description. So
I would love to see that if you're willing to share it with me. I just want to appreciate that totality of that experience for you. You really painted a really detailed picture of the different elements, but how do you pull off an event like that to build that sort of critical mass of folks wanting to show up to it, but also setting ground rules, what the agreements are to engage in those conversations.
And so for collecting the speakers for the women's panel, our school is block schedule. And so I needed people to come basically 2 days in a row for 6 periods total. And I knew that that wasn't practical for a lot of professionals. And so what I ended up doing was actually creating a sign up form. And people, so my panels were different every single class period. So some people could come for the one day and do 3 panels, but not come for the next day. Or some people could only come to a morning session. And so the women's panel was very interesting. So I had authors, an animal control officer, the female fire department, oh gosh, I'm not going to remember what the official capacity. She runs our fire department, the chief of the fire department. And so each panel was slightly different depending on which women signed up. And I actually, there's a women's group that shared my link. And so it filled up like that.
Wow.
As far as like getting a 6-person panel to talk. And that was actually fun for me, getting to meet a whole group of different women. So I would say, like, in terms of recruiting people, organizations that already exist to support different groups of people are great people to reach out to. Just putting it out to the community. You know, I guess I was a little nervous about like not knowing the people who were coming to present. So I did a little bit of background research and set some guidelines for my speakers as well as for my kids about, like, you know, for the religious panel, like, it needs to be educational about your religion and not like recruiting people to go to your church. Cause I just, you know, I was worried. I had a little bit of anxiety, personal anxiety about that part of that panel from what parents would feel about that. But yeah, it was not hard to find people willing to come and talk about the different issues that, or the different topics, I should say, that we were covering.
So I think that the piece that we're looking at here is that we have the opportunity to have these panels or text or media. There's going to be the substrate of some material that we're bringing, something for us to consider. And then the next step is, how do you have a conversation about that? And so panels are great opportunities for folks to consider new perspectives that they haven't had before. But how do we as educators build capacity for people to actually talk about it? I think we are so much in this society now consumers of content, and good content is essential. Like, good stuff that's stimulating to us is important. But I think that the next step that we're looking for here is how to have conversations that are engaging afterwards. So the idea of common conversations is really the backbone of this project. It includes this common reading, but I could see in the future we could also have common media moments where you're watching somebody talking about their personal experience, and that could be the substrate for that conversation. I just want to check chat. There's a couple of folks that have asked some questions about like how to engage in this content going forward. There is an invitation in the group agenda that has an invite to that session on Friday. We'd appreciate you joining with us. And then keep your ears open as we go forward in the next several weeks to get this information out to schools. If you're interested in participating or want to know more, please talk to your fellow colleagues in your school sites and see if you can get a group together to make an initiative at your site to engage in this. I think the more people we have countywide doing this project, it's going to be much better and easier for us to engage it. And it's going to build a norm in our community. What is the norm in our community? We have the ability to talk about difficult things. And the more we talk about it, I do believe that that's going to help us move forward as a society to have a safer place for our kids, a more equitable and inclusive community. So any questions from anybody before we log out? We're close to the end of the session. I see there's lots of good links there. And if folks, before you log out, you can save the chat if you want to get those. There should be an option for you at the bottom if you want to get those links.
Is there any way that we can sign up to get information on this upcoming project? Is there?
Sure, I'll tell you what, if you want to just put your email address in the chat, I'll save that chat before we log out here. And that way I can include you in the email list that's existing currently.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much for your interest. And thank everybody for joining us. I hope that your fall goes as smoothly as possible.
Thank you for initiating this conversation.
Sure.
And So I look forward to emails, Matthew. There's, I was checking out the Courageous Conversations website and see that there are a lot of things that I really don't understand about the 6 conditions. I'm not sure what, there's a framework, and one thing is choosing books and organizing the schedule. Another is an in-depth understanding of really what it is that Courageous Conversations is proposing. They have $50 workshop introductions, which I'd be willing to take, but I don't see anything on the schedule. And I wonder if within SCO, that's something that could be provided if you've been trained. Or yeah. Okay.
I love that. And that'll be
Yeah.
a suggestion I'll bring back to SCO. I know Dan's might still see us window here, but if Dan's listening, we would
Yeah.
love SCO engage us with that. And the bigger picture, I think too, is longer term, again, just dropping seeds. It would be great if SCO had a point person on diversity, inclusion, and equity countywide that would be able to help organize this stuff. I mean, I'm more than happy to engage, but I so love the support we get from SCO. You guys are amazing. But it'd be lovely to have just a clearinghouse, a person who maybe can help drive some of these initiatives as we go along.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And actually I have one idea I'd love to brainstorm with you about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, SCO, for your support and for everybody for joining with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew. This is a great project, and yeah, we're happy to help and support this in any way. And if we obviously probably make the most sense as sort of the convener, so we're happy to play that role.
Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate it. All right, everybody, have a great day. Take care.
Let me know when you've saved all your chats, and I won't end it till then. I see that there's still 6 people. Allison, did you get everything you needed?
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Actually, yeah, go ahead and close me out.
Okay, I just sure that you.
Somehow my Zoom link got wonky and I don't even see how to exit. So it's just sort of
I
doing
can
its
bump
thing.
you out. I just didn't want to kick you out if you hadn't saved everything you needed.
Kick me out. Thank you.
Okay. Sunny, are you okay? Are you doing okay?